first of all, thank you for joining. And second of all, I want to share my screen. Judy saw at the Hillsborough meeting. Well, actually, both of you, most of you were there too. Yes, I'm screen sharing. I shared this report from the 2022 home buyers and sellers, the generational trends. They put one of these out every year from NAR, and it usually comes about early mid-February. So usually we try to get it out to you. And then I always do a recap of those. I've done it for the last 5 years, kind of a recap to help everybody understand it or interpret it. There's a lot in this report. As you can see, it's 143 pages. I did put it, someone requested it. I did link it on Facebook to the group. And we started with buyers in Hillsborough, and I won't take credit for this report. It is not my report. I'm just interpreting it and sharing the information with the firm. So it's the 2022 home buyers and sellers gen report. These are the folks that were in place that took care of it and created this report. Of course, Leslie Ruta Smith out of Texas was the president at the time. Kenny is president-elect or president now. And then again, here's all the folks that are creating this research project to make it come to life. And again, that is not me. So I'm not taking credit for this report. So I am going to jump to page 97, which is home sellers. We went through buyers first. We'll do sellers this time. So there we go. I want to be able to see it better. Okay, perfect. Can you all see this? Are you all good? So first thing, looking at the age of home sellers, you can see the vast majority are kind of my range, 42 to 56 years old. But right behind it is the younger boomers at 57 to 66. So if you look at this, this is about 68% of the population was a seller between 32 and 66 years old. And then you come right in behind it with 19% of the 67 to 75. Then if you look at household income, you can clearly see kind of that $100,000, 85 to 100,000 is the Gen Zs. And then you scoop down to 100 to 150 for the Xers, and then same, you kind of scoot a little bit again to 100 to 175 for the young boomers, late boomers. You can see as their income then goes backwards. Yes, Mosin, what you got, bud?
Can you see my messages I've been posting?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the reason why a lot of people not joining us is because we are used to click on the link to join the meeting, but with this one, they have to kind of copy the ID and then paste it.
Oh, okay. Hey,
yeah.
Daniel, can you take care of that for us? Put the link in or share it out, and we'll just keep going. Thank you, bud. I appreciate it.
No worries.
So next up, if you look at the adult, almost 80% of the population was a married couple that sold houses. And we saw from the buying, it was married couples again, but single females were the highest ownership outside of married couples. That is the same here in selling, except for the younger generation. It's actually unmarried couples, which is not something that's the first time this popped up as the right after the married couple. So 23 to 31, if you'll see, that's a mixture. So number of children, you see that it's usually that younger generation, that 23 to 31 have none, but then it jumps up to 2 if you go 32 to 41. So sometime after 31, you typically have 2 kids according to the survey. Then if you jump up to 42 to 56, it's none, they've kind of gone and they're starting the empty nesters. But then above 56, you can see it's almost 100% no children in the home. So then look at the age of the home sellers. You can see age of the home seller versus the education. And across the board, the bachelor's degree is the strongest until you get to master's for 57 and above. But it's only 1 percentage point for education level. This one is glaring, and I'm going to sit here for a moment. I want you to sink this in. So if you look at the race or ethnicity of home sellers, so I think you were shocked last week to see that white and Caucasians were the bulk of the buyers. And again, it was in the 90s, high 80s, low 90s. But look at also who sold houses. If you look at race and ethnicity of home sellers, this is almost 90% across the board. Then if you look at the next, it's Hispanic and Latinos, but it's only 5 and 6% across the board. And then if you look at African American and Black, it's under 5% across the board. And then Asian and Pacific Islanders are under 3% for the most part. So there's a huge disparity in what was bought and sold last year by races. And African American home ownership last year was at its lowest point since we started tracking the data and Fair Housing Act in the mid 60s. So for some reason, last year, African American folks were priced out of the market for buying and selling. And I mean, this is just blatantly obvious where the bulk of buying and selling of housing is done, at least for the last year. Any thoughts on that? Comments? If not, I'll keep moving. So primary language clearly is in the high 90s is English. First time or repeat seller. So first time were really anyone under 41. And then repeat sellers were anyone 42 and older. So proximity to the home, almost all of them were in the same state, except for and the older generation tends to move further away, and they tend to move further away to join family. And that's when the other region pops up in the older generation. Location, you can look at almost half across the board was a suburb or a subdivision, except for folks 56 and under. The next line item would be urban areas or central cities. There was a mass exodus last year with people being able to work from home and having to live in city centers. If you look at the type of home sales, majority of them are detached single families. This is interesting too, the size. So the size of the home sold, only all of them around that 2,000 square feet mark. Only that 42 to 56 or 32 to 41 are really above that 2,000 mark. That's also when we added, remember earlier slides, 2 kids. So you gain size when you add those 2 kids, but then before and after you lose size or stay the same. Number of bedrooms across the board, 3-2. So a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house is in demand regardless of age group. So prices. So if you look at the price of what they sold versus price of what they purchased, the only difference is when you get to 57 and above, they actually started pocketing some of the equity. Up until 56, it's always been higher. They paid out more than what they currently lived in. But also, if you think about that, they've added 2 kids and they needed more square footage. So what that did was then the cost of the square footage would raise the price. Primary reason, if you look, home is too small, same age we've been talking about, 23 to 30, 31 and 32 to 41. Those folks found that their house was too small based upon their size of their family. But then the next pop-up is the home is too large on the other side. So once you hit 57, you've got a house that's too big and you want to sell it and downsize. Handful here across the board from 23 to 66 was a job change. And then the other pop-up is the retirement. Seller wanted to sell earlier, but they stalled because the home was worth less than their mortgage. You can see all of these in the 90s. No, that wasn't the reason. They sold when they really wanted to. So tenure, how long did they live in the house? So based upon the age, 42% of them lived 4 to 5 years. We know that magic number is usually people buy and sell within 7 to 10 years. And that's what you're seeing. Younger is 4 to 7. And then 7 to 10 is the other statistics. So it's when you meet them in that cycle of age as to where they are ready to purchase or not, or where they're ready to sell or not. Distance between the home they purchased and the home they sold. And you can see it's almost always within 20 miles up to age 56. So it's 20 miles or less. Once you get older than that, that's when they tend to move towards or closer to family, and it can tend to be further distances. Method, used a broker. Look at this. Every single category was in the 90s across the board. Sales price compared to the list price. You can see the biggest bulk of that was 100% or higher. So we all know how last year's sales were going. The number of weeks, few of them were past 4 weeks. You can see the majority of them were in the first 2 weeks. And we know in the cycle of a house sale that those first 2 weeks are critical. So if you've not priced it right, or if your condition's off, those first 2 weeks are going to dictate where the price goes in the future weeks. So first 2 weeks are critical. Number of times their asking price was reduced. You can see in the almost 80% across the board, no one. And then only a handful, 10% or more, did it once. Incentive offered. This was interesting. In the 70s, nothing was offered, just the price in the house and you buy it. And next up was home warranties right behind it. And then assistance with closing, that didn't come into play really until around 10%. And it was that 23 years old to 56-year-old. So satisfaction with the selling process. And I do want to, we did this for buyers as well. If you look at the percent that are very satisfied in the gray and somewhat satisfied in the blue, if you add those, because that means satisfied, they're all in the 90s, regardless of age range. If you look at dissatisfied and very, none of them add up to over 10%. So 90% are using an agent and 90% or better are satisfied. Equity. You can see the equity grows as the age grows. That's just kind of basic math. Urgency, most of them were not urgent. They waited for the right offer on their home. And then they were somewhat urgent. They had to sell the home, but they had plenty of time to do it. That's 80% or better in every age range. So looking at real estate professionals, anybody got questions on that? Any of that so far?
Nope.
Awesome. So home selling and real estate professionals, we'll go into chapter 7 and we'll stop there. This report has like type of home sold, method of payment. It breaks it down in several chapters, but looking at this, agents for selling almost always 40% of the time, they were referred by a friend or relative. And then the next highest category for every single one of them was they used that agent previously. So if you look, every one of these add up to like 70% until you get to 57-year-old and how they found their agent. Number of agents that they contacted, you can see that almost 85% of the time across the board, they only chose one. And then the other 10% of the time, they only chose 2. They interviewed 2, chose 1. Did the seller use the same agent for selling as their home purchase? And you can see kind of 70%. As you get older in age, The reason more likely that they don't use the same agent, because they remember, if you earlier slides, they moved out of proximity 40 miles or more to from where they currently live. So they probably switched up agents because of the location. Home listed on MLS in 90% across the board. So almost always they put it in the MLS. Level of service provided, and in the almost 90% across the board, you can see that it's a broad range that the agents were providing to the sellers. What do they want from the level of service? They basically, the number one thing, they wanted to price it competitively, regardless of age range, except for this little bump up right here. And they wanted ways to fix up the home. Remember, that age range was a larger home, and they're looking for ways to bump up the price and how to fix it up. Most important fact was the reputation of the agent in the 30s across the board. Honest and trustworthy. That came out on the buyer side also. Honest, and they wanted honest, and they wanted the reputation to be a positive one. So that, if across the board, if you look at that, that's 50% if you add the two together ish. And usually it's a friend or family member. That's kind of an eye-opening. Methods, MLS was in the 90s across the board. That's where most of the marketing came from. Their yard signs in the 60s. And then Realtor.com, which we know feeds from the MLS. So that's one and the same. The agent website's about half the time. Third-party aggregators, those are the Zillows and the everybody else, the Redfins and everybody else that is still feeding from the MLS. 40% of the time was the open house, and then the real estate company website. Big bump in social media here for 23 to 41 years old. So that social networking piece for advertising the house was huge, a big bump up. Negotiating, half the time they initiated the discussion of compensation. The client brought up the topic and the real estate agent was able and willing to negotiate. Will the seller use the same agent again? If you look at regardless of age, it's almost always across the board in the 70s. Probably is always in the mid to high teens. So that's mid 70s and high teens is 90% of the time ish, right? So how many times the seller recommended typical agent, and that was based on age. There wasn't times that seller recommended. Compensation paid by seller in the mid 70s, higher 80s, based on age. And it was all in the 90s, the payment was a percent of the sale price. So that kind of concludes that portion that I was going to cover this week with the selling side, and then open it up for questions for you all. Stop sharing and come back in. Perfect. Judy, Mosin, Daniel, either of you got questions? Because basically you got me free time, anything you want to ask under the sun.
Not a question, but I'll just throw it out relative to the aggregators.
Sure.
So for the very first time, a seller client told me that I should get their Zillow value adjusted because the value on Zillow for their house was way too low. And
are they looking at the Zestimate? Is that what they're saying?
yeah. So they thought their estimate was artificially low. It didn't represent, the changes in the property, and it didn't reflect the market. And so despite the fact that we know that that's a third party company, and that we really, in theory, have nothing to do with that value, I did, just to humor the seller, I did shoot them a couple of properties, and guess what? The value changed.
Oh, gosh, okay. So you
So
said Zillow some properties and said, hey, this value is low.
Yeah, but they were bad comps.
Yeah.
They really were not relevant in terms of um, I can't remember exactly, but I
Was
was,
it more than 10% difference, Judy?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So just, I mean, just for other agents to know about, and I didn't even know that I had the ability to go in there on behalf of a homeowner to do
Yeah.
anything. Because there is a button that the owner can claim their home and they can go in and do it. But
Correct.
somehow I stumbled upon another portal or something that allowed me as the agent to, and I had another one previous to that, which was very valid, that, 2 doors down, identical townhomes, they were way off. My subject property was way low, and I sent them that other one and they adjusted it way up. So I thought, okay, well, that one makes sense to me, but this other one, really, if it were me, I wouldn't have adjusted it, but they did. So for whatever that's worth, I mean, if people have other unreasonable sellers who think they should have their agent adjust the estimate, it seems like it can be done.
It can be. I'll tell you, this estimate is kind of always after the fact because all they're doing is pulling records of sales and they're averaging them out. And the other thing is about his estimate, it's almost always not wrong. And the reason it's almost not wrong is because it's an average. And it says in there, this is the price with a percent swing up or down. It could be either way. So it's kind of a 20 to 30% swing up or down. It just says we're not wrong here because it's somewhere in this 30% window. And you can, as an agent, go in and, or the client, even like you just said, that they can claim their home, they can change number of bedrooms, square footage, that kind of stuff. And often they also pull records from like tax docs, and they could have added something, like added a room, added a sunroom out of this, and then it didn't pick it up. So several cases of that, and that square footage adds value quickly. But often because tax records are every 8 years, we usually see that when they not gotten all the permits to get something completed or added, because they're not on record of an increase in size. So, but perfect. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And Sharon, Sharon, it's my Mabry slang. The thing about it is, and there's a disclaimer in both the buyer agency listing, and the listing agreement that says we can't be held accountable for third-party distribution. Because once we put it out there, and like I looked at a house yesterday that's under contract. On Realtor, it is under contract because that feeds from the MLS. The third-party aggregate did not pick up the under contract. It looks like it was still active. So they did add a disclaimer, thank goodness, that says that internet advertising, once we put it in there, we're not liable for. So because at some point, Keller Williams actually shared to over 800 other websites. And Daniel, you may know that was an old stat from when I was here before. It may be, you may know a different number, but it used to be shared. Once we entered it, it went to like 800 places. And that was part of our listing presentation, was these are all the websites we share your home on. So that
But
was.
you said, Jason, you said that in our listing agreement, there's reference to third-party aggregator values?
There are, information. It doesn't say value specific. It just says we are not, as an agent listing your home, not held accountable to outside party websites.
Okay, good to know.
And that was a change in the last, if it wasn't last July, Judy, it was the year before. And there were some lawsuits that came out, you know, X website has this and Y website has that. And because most websites don't update as fresh and as often as Realtor.com does, like it updates the moment something's entered, not refreshes every 15 minutes or every day. Some websites refresh every day, and that information can be old. So that's why in the listing agreement, it actually says about third-party internet providers. So anything else, Daniel, Mosin, you guys have anything? Judy, I really do appreciate you joining regularly. And I think you always bring something to the table, even at meetings and everything else. So I want you to know I appreciate you.
Thank you. So I like the things to watch out for that you've run into with other clients that we can learn from. That's my favorite part of this broadcast.
Well, good. I'll try to keep bringing useful information.
Mhm.
So if y'all don't have anything, we're gonna peace out. All right, Mosin, thank you, bud. Daniel, thank you. Judy, as always, thank you too. And of course, Daniel will reproduce this and edit it and get it posted later.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
I know.